The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law is hosted by the Government Blockchain Association, a worldwide community to connect, communicate, and collaborate. This show is produced by Podtex. To learn more and how to host your own show, go to www.podtex.com. Podtechs. Podtex, your partners in podcasting.
Hi, this is Gerard Daché. I'm the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. And today we have Carlos Toriello with us. Carlos is down in Central America. Is doing a lot of stuff in the election and voting space. Carlos, I'm just absolutely thrilled that you're with us today. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you're doing?
Hi, Gerard. Well, thanks for having me. My name's Carlos Toriello. I run Fiscal Digital, a citizen audit program here for elections in Guatemala with the intent of expanding to the rest of Latin America. My story with blockchain goes back a few years, actually, in a previous job that I had where I was working with my dad in a family-run business, and we found out overnight that our business had been incorrectly placed by the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control's narcotics and terrorist kingpin watch list of sorts. And it was stunning news that involved a 2-year-long process with the Department of Treasury that finally ended up having us removed from that list, since we had no place on it to begin with, but took 2 years of doing so. And in the meanwhile, we suffered quite a bit in terms of our local relationship with banking institutions here in Guatemala. And that's when I realized that a censor-resistant system was very valuable to protect the rights of innocent citizens like myself, who unfortunately, because of the characteristics of the global financial system today, can be essentially convicted and seen as guilty before they have any kind of chance of, there's just a sense that you are guilty until proven innocent, instead of the other way around, which is what I thought was the way that the world worked. But that led me to investigate Bitcoin, and after that, I fell in love with blockchain as a technology, and have since created a volunteer network focused on Central America and accelerating blockchain use here in the region. That's when we stumbled upon the opportunity to apply blockchain to elections, starting with Guatemala, because the Guatemalan system in terms of voting is actually extremely beautiful and one of the biggest sources of pride for Guatemalans. We run our elections as volunteer citizens that are called upon every 4 years to administer each voting table and carry out all of the election procedures. The national authority that is in charge and is an autonomous entity in the state is responsible for organizing the elections, but at the end of the day, hands over the responsibility to citizens. This is a unique trait of Guatemala. The rest of Latin America has a very similar voting process, with the notable exception of Brazil, where they included e-voting several years ago. But essentially all Spanish-speaking Latin American countries hold elections in a similar way. And Guatemala is unique in that it empowers citizens to handle the entirety of elections on voting day.
Wow. So let me ask you a question. How did you first kind of become aware of this, and walk us through from an experience standpoint? You're living your life, and you see something, you become aware of something, and then all the way into launching your project. Walk us through kind of that story.
Well, it's been a roller coaster, or Alice in Wonderland type situation where um, when I basically had the opportunity to experience firsthand the urgent need for censorship-resistant financial instruments. It's the kind of thing where I'd already been aware of Bitcoin and primarily Bitcoin at the time. But it isn't until you go through a very difficult situation where 30 years of family business of hard work and employing people were essentially thrown down the drain because of a bureaucratic mistake in Washington. And it's also extremely ridiculous because uh, we're in Guatemala. Our constitution, our legal system, supposedly has nothing to do with decisions that are made in some office building in DuPont Circle or whatever. So uh, I vaguely understood the power and the importance of Bitcoin, but when it happens to you in such a direct way, at least for me personally, there was no going back. I understood that a fair amount of my life and my work and energy needed to figure out how this technology would make its way to people everywhere. And so the biggest, I guess, surprise, I was betting on other people having similar experiences or at least similar feelings about the potential of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And so I decided that I no longer wanted to just have these private conversations between me and my brother, who I work with in a number of our initiatives, and decided to open it up to the public and start these meetups in Guatemala City. And the energy was just amazing in terms of the people and the kind of interest back in, this is end of 2016 and 2000, most of 2017. The kind of folks that came out of the woodwork to join our meetups on the premise of, let's discuss nerdy, esoteric topics like blockchain's impact on public registries. That's not something that you'd expect a crowd to come out and see. And it ended up being that way. We had meetups where over 50 to 60 people would show up. We held the first transaction of a street vendor. We trained a street vendor that sells hot dogs here in Guatemala City to accept Bitcoin, and had people buy their hot dogs off of the street with him. Things of that nature, where you saw people uh, really connect with each other, bringing in incredible experiences from different industries, from finance, from health insurance, government, energy. There's blockchain and the community that it brings together, and the potential and excitement that it generates is like something I've never seen before. I think I heard someone say recently that the brain drain that's occurring due to blockchain and cryptocurrency from all these industries is like nothing that's ever happened. It's no longer a north-south brain drain, where the smartest minds from Guatemala, for example, are leaving to get education in the United States and ending up as professionals there. It's actually more of a, industries all over the world, their brightest minds are jumping ship and being a part of something that's completely decentralized. And that when you meet someone from Korea and you're in Guatemala, you speak the same language, and you immediately connect on values like I've never seen before. And it's
Yeah,
opened
Carlos,
up
I have to tell you, it is so apparent to me, because we've been dealing with people globally on the subject, and I think that the thing that really holds these people together, right? One of them is they're very out of the box thinkers, right? They're innovators, right? They're not constrained by the lines. Well, this is the way we've always done it, right? And the other thing is they're really passionate about solving problems, right? They're not the kind of people that just want to sort of watch the problems go by. And you take those two qualities, right? That somebody's really innovative and creative, right? And then at the same time, they're really passionate about solving problems and making things better. And you put those together, it really forms this culture right? That is it's just amazing. It's probably one of the most amazing groups of people I have ever seen.
Yeah, and I think isn't it Margaret Mead that said the only thing that ever changed the world was a small group of dedicated individuals. And so I think that's happening everywhere now. And so it's not a small group of individuals. We may be
No,
small on a global scale, but our communities locally are, in terms of the one that I've had the pleasure of leading here in Guatemala, it's sizable. And it's the kind of thing that unites people, that is just different, right? So what drove us, and for me particularly, it's been frustrating in the last couple of years of just understanding the potential of this, but not seeing it really translate into uh, a a concrete example that you can easily explain to someone. Whenever someone that's just off the street would show up to one of our events, and I'd have to go into, all the weeds of what cryptocurrency is, what blockchain is, what cryptography we're talking about, computing services and mining. And, it really scares people away in terms of just normal people that haven't been turned on because they either haven't had a visceral experience like I did with the financial system that forces them into understanding this technology and incorporating it, or B, aren't innovators, aren't tech gurus that are always on the cutting edge. But how do we make this relevant to people's daily lives? And that's, through that frustration in the first couple of years of basically having these uh, excited about all these potential ideas, but not seeing them translate into day-to-day stuff, especially for someone in Guatemala. It's like, how do I make this relevant to a farmer up in the mountains, to the point where they can understand it, right? And so I felt like Bitcoin and a bunch of other examples are interesting, but it's hard to connect with someone that could potentially be just using a cell phone, and that's all their understanding of technology, right? So that's when we started looking at all the different opportunities, and elections weren't on my mind until they started coming up in Guatemala. It's every 4 years in Guatemala. All countries in Latin America have their different schedules. In our case, it's every 4 years, so you can count on it happening. And in our case, since it's a volunteer system where we are called upon by the authorities to take this on, it's something that's in the back of your mind, and you're just part of this. I'd call it like a reserve citizen army, right? There's this reserve army that every 4 years is mobilized for months at a time, and then goes back into reserve for the next couple of years. So when we were mobilized again, I realized this is our opportunity. This is our chance to translate this into something that everyone can relate to, which is voting. Every single citizen can vote. Not enough of us do, but everyone can vote. So figuring out how to make it relevant to that kind of person was what drove us into this.
And I'm sure that everybody welcomed it with open arms, and you had no resistance, and it was just a love fest, right?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm an optimist, an optimistic realist, so I knew there'd be challenges, but that's where it's also really cool in how Latin America works is, in terms of elections. There's a lot of problems in Latin America, but elections are uniquely positioned to be a great space for blockchain innovation, and that's because these voting tables exist, and anyone can come and participate in them, obviously, because you can vote at them. But it also means that anyone can organize an election observation program. You can sort of incorporate, you don't really even need like a legal entity. You can show up to almost any election authority in any country in Latin America and say, I want to organize an observation program for the elections. And that, if you go through some minor hoops, you will be able to accredit yourself and as many people and volunteers and folks that you can mobilize with official accreditations that empower you to show up and be there. That's essentially how the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and all the universities have their national election observation programs. Those are the programs that end up, getting interviewed on CNN or something like that, where they have an opinion in terms of whether or not the elections were carried out appropriately, right? So even in the case like Bolivia, so Bolivia just had elections this past month. A lot of people should be aware now that the president there, who was unlawfully and unconstitutionally extending his dictatorship, trying to make it seem like he was a democratically elected leader, was found by independent election observers to have carried out massive election fraud. And so that's why we can catch these things. Different governments place different barriers to these programs, and different countries have better protections, but most of them have to enable some type of observation. And that's where we started out with this back in 2008 in Guatemala, 2018, sorry, in Guatemala, with a national referendum. And that's the path that we chose, being an election observation program. Unfortunately, we did come up with some barriers that kept us from mobilizing then. But since it's the kind of thing that always happens, and our national elections happened this year again, we mobilized again, but with the benefit of hindsight, right? That's where it's important to just get involved. And anyone that's listening, I highly recommend that if you have an idea on getting blockchain to be useful for folks on the ground, just try it out. It's test it out, try, fail, learn, and repeat, right? That's how we've been doing it, and especially in the public sector, if it's a citizen-run program, that's the only way to go about it. So, in terms of elections,
yeah. So tell me a little bit about how that sort of trend, how you went from that monitoring program into creating fiscal digital.
Sure. So, because anyone can do this with elections. You don't need to be an international organization. You don't need to be a government. Citizens can do this in elections. At least that's the case in Latin America, where you can show up and observe. And so, because there's no barriers, the only real barrier is apathy and ignorance and I guess lack of money to finance a purely citizen-run program. And so, with the elections this past year, I got involved with a number of folks as observers and witnesses, and surely, similar to what happened in Bolivia, in Guatemala, we had our election in June, and the system crashed for 5 days, and it was mayhem. Public trust was completely lost. There were outcries and calls for resignation by massive protests run by different citizen groups and some political parties, asking the voting authorities to quit because the system crashed for 5 days and produced terrible information that was obviously wrong for days at a time. And so the outcry was significant, and I was right there, throughout it, seeing that the solution that was being proposed by the authorities in terms of how they would correct this was incredibly unsatisfactory. It's a solution that was thought out by lawyers that have no understanding of digital technology, and I ran the numbers in terms of how long it would take the solution to play itself out, because they were essentially calling all political parties to do a recount one by one. And our election process has hundreds of thousands of documents that would need to be recounted physically in front of everyone, and it would take over a year to end. And so I knew it was going to crash and burn, and I felt like there was a real need to do this quickly, because the more time passed, the higher the likelihood of funny stuff happening. And so that's when we mobilized a group of essentially hacktivists from our community of blockchain enthusiasts called Seba.io. And I approached all of them to say, as many as I could, look, we need a friend of mine tells me that we turned on the bat signal, right? We threw up the blockchain symbol up in the sky, and people came out of the woodwork and basically worked nonstop for about, well, we haven't stopped, but intensely for 4 weeks to publish open source code that we put up on GitHub, and launched a web app that was able to receive users and just get the ball rolling, so that we were able to react pretty quickly to a crisis that was going on and provide an alternative to people to carry out an audit, a citizen-run audit of the entire election system. And the one unfortunate thing that I really regret is that we had to do this reactively. We had to react to the fact that there was fraud happening, or the suspicion of fraud happening in real time. Whereas if you prepare this, if you spend 4 weeks, ideally 4 months, before any election in Latin America, use our open source code and have work with us ideally, because we can give you some good suggestions. You can do this in any Latin American country, and instead of reacting to an election, you can preemptively prepare, so that when the documents are being generated, you're right there at the tables, creating a registry that can be placed on several blockchains. We ended up using 4 of them in order to demonstrate the power of blockchain to a citizenry that initially won't really understand it. But the fact that right now this past election in Guatemala will be the first one to have ever been completely recorded on 4 different blockchains means that probably for the rest of human history, people will be able to look back and verify all the work that we did.
So let me ask you. Let me pause you for a second. Walk me through how it works, right? So
Sure.
Describe from either the user perspective or the technical perspective. Just do a sort of a process flow on how the whole thing works.
Sure. So each voting table at the end of the voting day pumps out all the ballots. So it's a paper ballot system. So each voting table counts all their ballots and generates a summary document at their voting table. That summary document is used physically by different bodies, kind of in a ladder system, hierarchical system going up, where the base feeds the next level, and then that level feeds into the next level. And that's how we get to a national count. Essentially, you take the ballots at the very bottom, you create a summary document. That summary document is taken by municipal authorities to create a municipal count. That municipal count is taken to a district, and so on until the national results are achieved. And those documents at voting tables can be digitized. The voting authorities currently have a very quirky system that I believe is where the fault lies, and I call it the regional cancer. It's a preliminary results system that's spread across all of Latin America, where at voting centers, these voting tables scan their voting documents by handing it over to a temporary worker that's contracted essentially for that day, who scans it, and then that ends up being publicly available in the national authorities' website. But there's a lot of mechanisms that aren't clear to the public in terms of how those pictures end up getting shown on the internet. What we're suggesting, and what we try to attempt to do, is at the voting tables get photographs from those tables. Since we had to react to the system, unfortunately, we needed to get the documents directly from the voting authorities. So what we did is, once all of the pictures are generated by the scanners throughout the country and placed into a database, a central database of the authorities, we had access to that database because we legally have to be able to. Citizens that request access must have access to them. And so we took all of those JPEG files and hashed them and registered them on Bitcoin, EOS, Horizon, and Dogecoin. So once we had all the 126,000 documents, they were hashed and registered on all of these blockchains, and then placed on our cloud service. Once they're in the cloud service, then our users can consult them and generate data. That's where we can walk through the process of being a user. a Fiscal Digital user goes to our website, fiscaldigital.gt, and creates their user by submitting first name and last name. They can be pseudonyms, so the names are irrelevant. The only piece of information that's necessary to validate the identity is a cell phone. So they place their cell phone number, and that's when we use a verification software to send them a text message. Once they're verified and they go through our CAPTCHA process, they now have access to these photographs that represent each voting table's election results. And so with the photographs in front of them, they can generate or digitize the numbers that they see on the pictures. That's how that's why we say Fiscal Digital, let's count the votes together. Because what we're doing is opening up all of the election system to anyone, anywhere in the world, to help us digitize in order to create an audit of the election results. That means that if we had 100 or a couple thousand people logged in, we can very, very quickly, through a crowd-sourced OCR service, generate a database that can be compared to the official results quickly. That means that if we don't trust the election results that are being made public by the authorities, we can run our own system as citizens and compare it. So in the future, what we're going for is empowering the voting tables so that they can generate the pictures themselves, hash them directly to blockchains so that it no longer goes through third parties before it gets to us. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm interested with the 4 blockchains you talked about. What's the cost typically associated with doing this, and who ends up bearing the price for that?
Sure. So this is very new, and we were lucky to find really excellent people and passionate people from each of those blockchains. We still want to find more. So the only reason we did 4 is because and we didn't do more is because those were the people in our community and that we had access to. So it's it's different for each blockchain, or you can do it in several ways. In the case of Bitcoin and Dogecoin, we used the same system. What we did was we had all the 120, in some cases 105,000 documents. We created the SHA-256 hash from each one of those JPEG files to pump out 105,000 different hashes. And then we used the Merkle tree to essentially summarize that into one mother hash.
Got it.
And so in Bitcoin and in Dogecoin, there's only one transaction that has that Merkle tree. And so we can basically trace that back.
So, and that way you can verify that there hasn't been any alteration to any of the data.
Exactly, to every specific JPEG picture. From then on, what that meant is, and by the way, we were able to get the authorities to provide the JPEG files with their hash. So they provided a SHA-1 hash for the JPEG files because they're still learning. We're still trying to teach them the importance of using 256. However, so the hashes were provided by the authorities. We created a 256 in addition to it and traced it back to the SHA-1. But anyway, that's how we did it in Bitcoin.
Yeah, but that's brilliant, because that way nobody can then claim that any of the data has been tampered with in any way.
So from then on out, what I explained to the authorities, from here on out, if anyone posts a picture to Facebook or Twitter or whatever, saying, look, these results don't coincide with this specific table, I told them, by doing this, you're creating a certification of that document. And so you can go back and then prove that fake news spreading on social media was actually a tampered document. And that's actually punishable by law. If you are using your social media account to spread an altered election document, that is a crime, and they can go after people now. So it's a means of empowering also the authorities to combat fake news and people that are spreading misinformation, right? So that was the case with Bitcoin. In the case of EOS, because EOS doesn't have transaction, or it's a different system, we were able to carry out 105,000 different transactions where all of the SHA-256 hashes were registered via individual transactions. And in the case of Horizon, I don't know if folks know Horizon, they used to be known as Zencash. They're a fork of Zcash. So the Horizon folks developed a whole suite of tools. They got really excited about this. And on the Horizon blockchain, you can find actually the JPEG files, the original JPEG files. We looked at doing this with Bitcoin as well, but obviously the cost of uploading a whole file and hundreds of thousands of files to Bitcoin was prohibitive, which is why we decided on the single transaction Merkle tree solution. But on Horizon, we have all of the information, from the file itself to the hashes and everything. So that means that we have a number of different ways of confirming that these documents can no longer be altered.
Wow. And then Horizon's a privacy coin, right?
So no, they're a blockchain. I believe that they have their own private treasury, kind of similar to Dash and other coins that have a treasury, and they have created a company using those treasury funds called Horizon.global that has funds to do this kind of thing. So we were lucky in that so going back to what we did, the idea of hashing files on a blockchain and on Bitcoin, for example, is not new. I sort of equate it to what Satoshi did in his first transaction. When Satoshi references that famous newspaper headline, the front page of the Financial Times
London
of London,
Times,
right?
You're right.
That's what gave me the idea originally. It's saying, if Satoshi can reference a essentially of the front page of a newspaper, then we can reference, a physical document at these tables.
Sure.
The difficulty
you just put in the comments field.
Yeah, the difficulty is doing this with 100,000 documents at 21,000 locations spread across a country with, sometimes difficult internet access, but it's possible, right? So that's really what we're trying to do, is empowering voting tables themselves, because right now they depend on intermediaries that are run by national authorities to scan these documents. And you think it's 2019. There's no reason why a citizen at a voting table cannot generate their own blockchain certificate of the election document that they themselves generated. And at that point, if we're able to,
Yeah, so talk me through a little bit about how this idea. So you guys did this once in Guatemala City, I'm guessing. Yep. Talk to me a little bit about your deployment strategy. How do you take this idea and kind of roll this out? Who are the people you need to talk to? And I know you've got a community that's much larger than just Guatemala or Guatemala City. Your community is actually quite regional. So talk to me a little bit about your thought process in terms of bringing this thing out.
Sure. So we're still in the thralls of the audit of Guatemala. So our first priority is finishing a complete audit of the Guatemalan elections of 2019. We should have finished already, but the official documents are hard to get. Despite the constitutional protections, there's a lot of information that we just haven't been able to verify. And so our first priority is to finish that so that we can publish a white paper / case study that goes in depth into how all of this happened, and use Guatemala to educate all Latin Americans about how this happens. Essentially, Guatemala as a case study to understand the regional opportunity. Now, we have our community has folks in Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, Honduras, all of Central America and Mexico. And so because these countries obviously have their own elections, we are using our community to find the right people to help us partner and do this, where all we need really is a small budget to pay for development services to adapt what we have built thus far for Guatemala, which the adaptation isn't that complicated. So all these elections are similar enough that the adaptations will be somewhat easy to accomplish if we have enough time. And then what is completely clutch is a local partner. That can be either the national voting authorities, a political party, or a ragtag group of citizens that want to demonstrate blockchain and its power, right? So fortunately, we found folks in Mexico, in the state of Guanajuato. There, the elections happened in 2021. Costa Rica, we were very excited about. However, the next elections are February 2nd. So unless we were able to find someone to help us with the 50,000 that we expect to have to spend on this in Costa Rica before January 10th or so, we won't be able to replicate in Costa Rica quite yet, and we'll need to wait. But Costa Rica is a perfect place to do this. We also have folks already interested in Colombia, Ecuador, and Argentina, but we have to essentially wait until the elections happen in different countries, right? So the strategy is finish Guatemala, identify the best leads for the first 2 or 3 pilot cases where we'll replicate this, and then after that, the goal is to find supporters within the crypto community to raise money to launch this on a global scale. We believe that the software has to be open sourced from the get-go. None of this can be proprietary. Everything has to be open source in order to really scale and go all over the world. So that what we're hoping for is to prove the case in Guatemala, publish the case study, and then demonstrate that it can be easily replicated in other countries and then taken to the world.
So is the overall thought process that everything's open source and it'll be moved forward basically by evangelists, or are you looking to create sort of an open source hub that can then be used in some kind of a business model so that other people can, by consulting, by configuring, right? Essentially, is there a business model component to it, or is it all pretty much an evangelistic model?
So, it's very new, and I don't have experience with open source business models. I vaguely understand that there is a possibility of doing this, but to be honest, I'm at the moment very eager to find people that would be interested in helping us identify potential business models, but extremely defensive in this has to be as open as possible, because at the end of the day, the data that we're generating are going to be election results, and there's no way that I want a business model to emerge where the data is where the value is and where the money is, right? I want it to be a service-based business model, but I need help. So far,
Yeah.
it's purely evangelistic.
You know what actually wouldn't be a bad idea, and this is something we could even potentially work on together, is what if we work together to create a certification, like a blockchain voting certification, right? That if people used essentially open source type standards or whatever, they could get their voting system certified. And so you could have companies and businesses that actually build those systems for people, and as long as they use uh, the concepts and they can verify that it's transparent, it's open, it's decentralized, right? Then they can achieve a certification. So that might be a way to go forward with that.
Yeah. So my concern at the moment is that this is, in terms of where election technology is in the world and in Latin America, this is very disruptive. It's not how things are done usually. There's so far I've seen a lot of resistance from people to even consider how to incorporate this. The only reason that I'm very optimistic about the Guatemalan case is that our system broke very publicly and very shamefully in front of everyone, and particularly at the doorstep of the authorities that spent millions and had years to prevent this, right? So we have an opportunity to change that here in Guatemala because it broke. There's a lot of other places that can claim that their systems work and therefore won't need to prioritize this, and that's why I think that it's really more of a citizen-run initiative at the moment. I think blockchain enthusiasts and crypto evangelists that want to prove, especially in Latin America, where unfortunately, I don't know if you remember, but the Venezuelan government created, or supposedly created, a cryptocurrency called the Petro. And I think that that's been used to discredit blockchain and discredit cryptocurrency in Latin America on a kind of a general scale, to have normal people suspect this and find this, anyone that's working on blockchain and cryptocurrency, to be suspect. And so I see Fiscal Digital as the best way of showing Latin America that blockchain and cryptocurrency is something that can prevent election fraud. If we do this, then people's opportunities and minds will open up to using it for other applications, particularly currency.
Well, listen, don't worry about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt being limited to Central and South America. When I tell people I'm in this space, I always see one eyebrow raise. They're like, sure, I'll stay away from you. So
yeah, it's just complicated. Whenever you talk to a banker, for example, in Guatemala, the first thing that they'll say is, "Oh, isn't that what the Venezuelan government did to launder money?"
Right, exactly.
And so
exactly.
it just means that until we get past that and we can demonstrate something, but it has to be something very worthwhile and useful. And if there's one benefit of what happened in Bolivia, what happened in Latin America, there have been just so many. The list is so long, it's depressing, right? But the most recent in 2019, we had Bolivia in October with just incredibly evident election fraud. Then we had Ecuador in March, Guatemala in June, in Honduras in 2017. I mean, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba at this point don't count, but it happens constantly. And so there's all these examples all across Latin America of people knowing and suspecting that there's election fraud on a pretty massive scale. And so the problem is regional. And it's a solution that I think many citizens across the entire region will appreciate and understand, and give them the opportunity to get curious about this. And if it works for election fraud, what other kind of fraud can we prevent? And there's tons of fraud going on in government in Latin America. So I'm hopeful and excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. So listen, how did you find out about GBA, and what are you doing? And then I want to move from that into how people can get involved with you. But let's start with how did you find out about GBA, and what's your connections there?
Sure. Well, I met a Silvio Pupo at an impact investing event in Guatemala last year, and I went to Miami and reached out to him to see if we could touch base. And he wasn't in Miami; he just said, "Why don't you go check out the blockchain center in Miami?" And I've just been in this mode of, I need to find people and tell them, people in the crypto space and the blockchain space, and tell them about what we're trying to do in Latin America. And when I heard that there was a blockchain center in Miami, I thought, well, there's certainly going to be people there that are interested in what we're doing. And that's how I ended up getting referred to you. And then I didn't know about the GBA until then. When I saw it, and obviously since we've touched base since, there's this kindred spirit, and obviously we share the same goals. And what Seba started out as here in Guatemala is essentially what you've achieved with GBA. So the community that we've been able to establish in Guatemala and other countries in Central America is exactly the same kind of community. So we want to integrate our Central American community into the GBA to achieve our shared goals, which is just get this technology to be in the hands of people that can make decisions and implement them, and understand it, right? How do we educate people on this potential so that they're not fearing it, they're seeing it as an opportunity? And so that's how it just became clear that GBA is a perfect fit for us as a citizen-run education movement to prove the value of solutions for government. And so since then, now I'm excited that I'm leading the GBA initiative, or the GBA efforts on a Central American regional level, to get more chapters active and more people involved, in the same way that we've been able to do already in our small communities.
Yeah, and then you're going to be involved in an event that we have January 31st. You want to talk just a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm excited to be a part of the accessibility and security panel on for elections at the Government Blockchain Association event on January 31st, 2020 in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Capitol. And I've been reaching out to government authorities here in Guatemala to get them to join us. And it's they're very curious about the event, and hopefully they'll be able to make it up there. And I'm very stoked about meeting folks from GBA globally to find out other avenues of collaboration to work on, because we're excited about this. On the elections obviously are very near and dear to my heart, and I'm always keen on figuring out how to expand Fiscal Digital. But my interests go broadly, right? It's about blockchain, and so anyone that is working on this that around the world in different initiatives, I'm excited to figure out how we can help each other.
And you're going to meet a lot of people at this event because the venue seats 450. It's at the U.S. Capitol Congressional Auditorium. And we're inviting leaders from states, from the national, from all over the world. And we're specifically going to be inviting a lot of folks in the election space. So you'll get the chance to meet some folks from Utah and West Virginia who've already done blockchain voting for military and handicap. So people that have like limited accessibility. It's going to be a great coming together and synergy of folks that are really serious about implementing blockchain solutions in a public sector environment. It's going to be awesome, and I'm thrilled that you and I got a chance to connect. And we had a real deficit in terms of leadership in Central and South America. So having you come on board in that capacity is going to be just awesome.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'll also say that our the mayhem that was caused by the complete mishandling of the Guatemalan elections forced the authorities to create a commission to review how to upgrade and modernize our election system. And obviously, we're submitting our proposal. The deadline is this Friday, and the final decision will be made in February by the national authorities. So the weight that our proposal will carry by being, a part of the GBA and having other experts review what we're proposing and have an opinion about this is dramatic, right? We're no longer this ragtag group of folks that are talking about this weird technology that no one understands and no one knows about. We're a part of a global movement that is doing this in different countries all over the world, not only for elections, but for other applications, so that it improves our likelihood of success with the election authorities, seeing this as not something dangerous that they will regret, but as the best way to move forward and update their technology to the 21st century and potentially turn Guatemala into the safest election system on the planet, and certainly in the entirety of Latin America. That is the case that we're making, and GBA is helping us do that for sure.
Yeah, and meeting other government officials that have actually implemented blockchain solutions, I think, goes a long way to take care of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So, hey, last question. Actually, two last questions, right? They're kind of linked together. So, if people want to get involved with what you're doing with blockchain and elections, what advice would you give them, and how can they get in touch with you?
Well, it's very tricky in terms of how best to get involved. Personally, I think you need to do some introspection about what are the issues that you care about the most. For me, elections are very near and dear to me. I've been a volunteer since 2011 in 2 election processes, and it's just something that I know inside out, something that I care deeply about, and that I know can benefit tremendously from this. So if you have, my biggest advice is get involved in your community, get involved in your local government, get involved in your municipal government, participate as a citizen actively in processes that you're passionate about or that affect you directly. Because the better you understand the weaknesses and the pain points in those systems, the better equipped you'll be to create a solution. And also, the better equipped you'll be to predict when they break, because that's, I think, our best opportunity is to get this technology, because it's so disruptive. It's going to be when these systems break. And so if we have people all over the world with their hands on the pulse, knowing exactly when these antiquated legacy systems break, and are right there ready to present something that's incredibly well thought out and potentially peer reviewed, that's how we will be able to get this kind of solutions adopted quickly. And in terms of contacting us, Facebook is actually our best space. We had a very active Twitter profile, but unfortunately, because of Twitter's changing policies, our user was eliminated. And so on Facebook, we are fiscal_digital. That's fiscal_digital on Facebook. Our website is fiscaldigital.gt or fiscaldigital.ceba.io. And our email and all of our contacts is on there. The easiest way, though, has proven to be Facebook, because there's a lot of us involved, and it's an easy way to generate a lot of information.
Excellent. And then I'm just absolutely thrilled that we got a chance to have this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you January 31st in Washington, D.C. in the United States Capitol.
Sure, and that's actually the best way to get in touch with me, is come up to DC and join us at the U.S. Capitol for this wonderful opportunity to accelerate positive change in the world.
Awesome. All right, my friend. Well, listen, you have a bodacious day, right? That's the word that most people know me by, bodacious. And we'll see you soon. Good. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.
We shine the spotlight on our community. Please take a few minutes and listen to one of our global members.
Susan Eustace with Wintergreen Research, and I have been running the election group for GBA. And as a head of that group, we're trying to promote discussion of election issues. And of course, the biggest thing is to get blockchain used in elections. And there's some really good use cases in West Virginia. And we want discussion about that. And then moving past that, we're working on fraud, prevention of fraud in election systems, and blockchain and GBA are a great venue for figuring out what we can do to control the election process and make it more secure. Get rid of the fraudulent systems, and using audit trails is perfect for blockchain. So the election group within GBA is designed to promote discussion and get ideas, solicit people's input so that we can come up with better solutions.
The Future of Money Governance and the Law is brought to you by the Government Blockchain Association, or GBA. The podcast brings together leaders in the public and private sector to discuss how government and industry can work together. We talk about how to enhance the integrity of our institutions and the quality of life for the people they serve.